Hi, my name is Mike Samartenis. I'm an 8th grade art science teacher at Hommocks, and Mr. Francis, Vasily Francis, is my colleague who also teaches 8th grade at the Hommocks. And so what we want to talk about today is our experiences using iPads in the classroom. And what we think is an important issue is the future and the potential for turning this into a one-to-one computing program. And so that's what we're really looking towards here. So in our presentation, we want to talk a bit about what we have done thus far, and some of the experiences we've had, some of the things the students have been doing. And then at the end, I want to come back and kind of talk about where we're going in the future with this. So just to kind of reiterate, I know I mentioned this already, where we've been so far, it all started with the lowly little iPod Touch, which was released about 5 or 6 years ago, and immediately I jumped on board, wrote a grant for it, and I got my little mini recording studio, which I mentioned before. And I told you I went back to the Grant Foundation the next year because I immediately realized the transformational potential of these devices, and so we kicked it up a notch to the fancy, shiny new iPod Touch, which came next, which was complete with a digital camera, which, as you can imagine, opened up a whole new world of activities that we could do with the students. And then 2 years ago, in the fall, actually it was the summer of 2011, Dr. Schaps approached me right around the time I was doing some work with Apple, and suggested we go and try out a pilot program using iPads. And we did that, and like I said, we had 2 full class sets. So we had 27 in my classroom and 27 in Mr. Francis's classroom. There you can see our card, which we used pretty much daily from day one. In all honesty, it was a bit of an overwhelming experience. I often tell people when we discuss this that I felt very much like a first-year teacher all over again, because we were really reinventing what we were doing in the classroom, really starting from scratch, building content, coming up with lesson ideas, and it was a big challenge. There were a lot of nights that Mr. Francis was here well after dark, or I was here well before the sun rose, and it was challenging, but at the same time it was very exciting because we saw the looks on our students' faces, which really kind of brought to life the effort we were putting forth. So I think I want to hand it over to Vasily now. He's going to talk a little bit about the things we've done in class thus far.
Okay, so when we first got the iPads, we, like many people, said, oh, what apps should we get? We should get apps, and figured out what kind of apps we should get. And we looked at the apps that were around, and we saw that there were thousands upon them. We just checked before we came down here. We saw that the latest figures, as of January, there are 775,000 apps on the App Store, many of them science, and we said, oh, let's get this app and that app and the other app, and to some extent that was great. This is the Hurricane app that we got, and then our first year we had Hurricane Irene, and then this year we had Hurricane Sandy, and then we thought maybe we should delete the Hurricane app. And we had an activity. We mapped the hurricane. The teachers were actually, as the hurricane was approaching, we were using the app to plot out which way it was heading and what the wind speed was and what the air pressure was, and take a look at that. And we went on and we developed a lab. We had students plot the information after it happened. We had them discuss why things were happening, even though we haven't even gotten to weather yet. But because of the timing, we had to try to connect the real-life events with what we were doing. So we wanted to create our own content, though, because we saw a lot of the apps had too much information, maybe for college level or for even high school level, or too little information because they were for little kids. There's a lot of apps, as you know. It's a great app for entertaining a young child at the restaurant or wherever else it might be. And we realized we need to concentrate our efforts on making something appropriate for our students. So we decided we needed to move away from just looking for apps and actually figure out what can work perfectly for us. So we found this app, which is called Link Viewer, and it is an app that was developed to help developers show clients what they could do with an app. So it's like a shortcut, and since we didn't know how to make apps, it's a shortcut to making an app. It basically allows you to make a PDF with links that kind of imitate what the app will do. So here's some examples of what we're using it for. For example, if you look at the bottom of the screen, we could put down information, and then they could click, to go to the next slide or go back to a slide. And that's how we started. We said, oh, let's just put some information on the screen. And we realized that wasn't enough, so we went further and said, oh, let's put pictures. Let's have things pop in. And we realized we could do that. We could make things come in and really kind of illustrate better the kind of stuff we were talking about. And we realized, well, we could go a little bit further than that. And so we started making it interactive, allowing the students to become more involved in the lesson, not just reading something where they kind of zone out. So we created something like this, where they could tap the red dots, and they could see whether or not it's moving fast, and whether or not there's erosion, or whether or not there's deposition. They could just kind of go through these things and just tap the points that they wanted to find information for and find it. And then we can actually test them. It's actually, surprisingly, something that the students asked for. They said, well, it'd be nice if we could test to see whether or not we learned the stuff that was on there. If we could have more questions, it would really help. So putting stuff like this in allowed them to click on a button, and if they were wrong, they could go back and try again, and if they got it right, they could move on. So we went from there, and we realized we want even more. It was a slow progression even with us, and as we were going along, we struggled to find ways to make it more accessible, better for what we wanted it to do. And we found Keynote, which is what this is, and we saw that we could start putting video in, put animations in that really show exactly what's going on in a river, for example, and show processes that in their earth science are very difficult to understand for these 8th graders and have a tough time seeing what's going on. So these kinds of animations really help out. This is an example of a lab we had before the iPads. We looked at the tides here in the Mamaroneck Harbor. And you look at it, and it's just a bunch of numbers, and that's exactly what it was for the 8th graders. It was just numbers, and it wasn't enough. And we saw that we could use the iPad, and we sat down, we took these numbers, we got all the information we could. This is all created by us. We made it so that it made some kind of sense. So what they saw is this, where they could see a harbor, you see the dock there, and then the meter stick there, which would measure the level of the water. You could see the phase of the moon and how that affected things, and how the time passed. At the bottom you see the date. So they really brought home, it just makes it so much more exciting than just a list of numbers. So we used it to help, first of all, get them excited about it, but second of all, it made even the students who had trouble with numbers, trouble in math, really kind of understand what was going on. So we realized it was more than just that. There was more that we could do. Every time we just kind of tried to keep going. And one of the things we saw was that we could really allow the students to work at their own pace. What I'm presenting now at my pace, you could look at your own pace. You want to slow down and pay attention to one of the screens, you could. You want to speed up because you know all that stuff, you can move on. And what we saw was there were lots of aspects of the iPads that allowed us to do that. So for example, one of the things we do, of course, in earth science is look at rocks and minerals. And we allow the students to, well, they have to, they need to be able to identify certain minerals. So when they look at this mineral, they would have to use the characteristics to identify what mineral it is. And some of the strong students, you know, they got it right away, they zipped through it, and they were done. Other students, though, struggled. And, you know, we can only be in one place at one time, so some students would have to sit there and wait for the teacher to become available. So, you know, we created this QR code. You might have seen QR codes. And we put them with the minerals. So that the student, here's one student, and in that blue little container there are the minerals. And if they got stuck, they could just put the iPad over the QR code and snap it, take a picture of it, and then they would get a hint to help them figure out what mineral it was. That way they could help themselves, you know, and enable them to work their way through the material without even relying on us to do it. So we use stuff like that. And we also were able to get real-time data for ourselves to see whether or not they were really picking up what they needed to understand, they were really understanding the material, or whether or not they were getting stuck. And I know that you guys have heard about the clickers and then, you know, testing the students by having them press a button. And we realized that the iPads can do that also. This is a website, actually Ed pointed it out to us, it's called Infused Learning, and it's all web-based. The iPads were in the hands of the students. And this is what the teacher would see, and you can see on the left there it says quick assessment, and it's extremely quick. I mean, when they say quick assessment, they mean it. You could just say, okay, 5-question multiple choice, answer it. And then we would just click on the left multiple choice, and you don't have to actually type in the choices. You can kind of write it on the board, and then they'll have A, B, C, D, E, and then the students put it in, and you get the results. You get an Excel spreadsheet that they can email you, and you can see everything that the students got right and got wrong, who got it right, who got it wrong. You can actually prepare more, and if you look on the right, it says My Quizzes. You can actually make something a little bit more detailed and have them work through that. And it allowed us to get immediate responses to whether or not the students learned what they had to learn in the class. So instead of having a little clicker like this, the iPad kind of replaces them. I think some of the nicer ones of these, they're like $2,000 for a class set. So the iPad kind of replaces that. I talked to math teachers who said, you know what, if we get iPads, we can also replace graphing calculators. We can use an app to use them for graphing calculators instead. And there's lots of aspects of that. We'll talk a little bit more about that later, about how the iPads can replace some of the other stuff that we use in school. I believe now I'm going to pass it on to Mr. Samartano. Thank you. Clicker.
Okay. So, Mr. Francis just showed literally a couple examples of what we have been doing. It barely scratches the surface. I mean, we could go on for hours and hours, as I'm sure you can imagine, about the things we've had our kids doing. But you can see some wonderful ways of sharing content, and you can see how these tools are really transforming the classroom. I'd like to talk a little bit about how these devices are so transformative that they really hold huge potential for the future. We all know that technology is everywhere. It is hard to avoid at this point. Is that me? Okay. Anyway, it's hard to avoid at this point. And I just want to show a quick picture that I thought was very funny. I saw this on CNN the other day. Is that me?
More problem.
Look, it's a computer. Okay. So, So I was watching CNN the other day, and we know everything that's been on the news lately has been about the papal selection in the last week. And I saw this picture. Some of you may have seen this. This is the Vatican, outside the Vatican, when Pope Benedict was announced as the new pope back in 2005. This was last week, which is kind of funny if you think about it. So you see the 8-year difference. And I thought about this at the same time. I read this, it was fascinating. 120,000 Pope-related tweets per minute while this was happening. So it's nice because it illustrates kind of where we were 8 years ago and where we are today. And we have to remember, and I forget this quite a bit as a teacher, but we have to remember that on the right, this is our students' lives. I mean, this is the way they've been brought up. This is the world to them. And it's easy when you didn't remember. This is it. And when you didn't grow up with this, it's hard to keep that in the back of your mind. We have to prepare them for college. We have to prepare them for a college classroom that's going to be totally different from what we expect and what we think of as a college classroom. This quote I actually found a couple years ago, and I think it's fascinating. It says, "The need to know the capital of Florida died when my phone learned the answer." You'll be interested to hear it said. He goes on to say, "The students of tomorrow need to be able to think creatively. They will need to learn on their own, adapt to new challenges, and innovate on the fly." So you might wonder who Anthony Civetta is. Anthony Civetta, when he said this, was a sophomore in a high school in Florida. And he was a blogger. He was a very well-known blogger online from a young age. And he used to go online and talk a lot about his frustrations with education. One of the facts being that he was sitting there in a classroom and being required to memorize all this information, though he could easily just pull out his phone and know the answer in 2 minutes. As a side note, he went on to work for Apple and a couple other major companies. He's a coder now, a programmer. So. Anyway, I thought that was interesting. Ultimately, though, the goal is this. We're trying to get kids ready for that classroom, which I think is fascinating. I mean, this is the future. I look at that. I feel bad. There's one kid who has a Dell over there. Everyone else is a mess. Anyway, this is the future. It's different from what we remember. And so in our classrooms every day, we're not just trying to teach kids science. We're trying to prepare them for life the way it is today. And so what I want to talk about now is what's the next step? Where do we go from here? We can see that there's some amazing stuff that's happening in the classroom, not only our classrooms, but throughout the district. And so the four of us, myself, Mr. Francis, and the other earth science teachers, have sat down and we've discussed this. And we all truly believe that the next step is one-to-one computing. And for those of you who don't know the term, it essentially means that each student has his or her own, in this case, iPad, that they don't use just in school, but they actually take home. And so for the last few minutes, I just want to explain why I think that's important and why one-to-one is a meaningful direction for us to head. At least this is the way the teachers view it. Just a couple thoughts. It's all about student engagement to me, which we've seen examples of, instilling these 21st century skills, creating an environment in which students can learn outside of the classroom as well as inside of the classroom, 24/7 learning. The materials usage is kind of fascinating in terms of the potential for cutting down on our usage of paper and things like that. And then the fact that this could potentially span all disciplines. In our case right now it's just science. We want to go beyond that. The coming online assessments, the PARC assessments, which we'll talk about, and creating this personalized learning, and of course addressing what everyone is thinking about, which is the Common Core standards, which are coming very quickly. So I just want to go through those and just give you a couple examples. Student engagement, I don't think I need to talk too much about it. I mean, Mr. Francis showed you some of the stuff we're doing, and you can imagine our students just eat this up. They're so excited to come to class day and use virtual solar systems, called Solar Walk right there, and to come and to watch keynote presentations and consume data that is interactive, that is rich in multimedia, for them to come and create their own content. These students are making a Lego stop animation movie using an app on the iPad. Students are recording a documentary, a mini documentary, using an app called Videolicious. Super quick, super easy, but really fun. The students are actually the creators of the content rather than just the consumers. This is one of my favorites, and I have to show this to you. This is an app released by NASA called Spacecraft 3D, and it's what's called an augmented reality app, which means it uses the camera to create a three-dimensional model of something. In this case, these are NASA spacecraft. So I'll show you how it works real quick. So this is actually it. This is me on my iPad in my classroom. You put this little piece of paper on the ground, and it creates a three-dimensional spacecraft. This is one of the Mars rovers, the Curiosity rover, which was launched and is now rolling around the surface of Mars. And it's fantastic. You talk about STEM education, you talk about getting kids excited about engineering and about science and technology. If this doesn't do it, I don't know what will. The kids had a lot of fun with it. They would lay down on the floor and put the little marker on their chest so it would look like the rover was driving over them. And if you look at it, you can control it, you can spin it around and raise the antennas and all sorts of stuff. And it's just a great tool for engagement. It's something you never could have imagined having in a classroom years ago. And if you talk about money, I don't know how much it costs, but I don't think we could get a rover in the classroom. So this is the next best thing we can do. In terms of 21st century skills, that's kind of a buzzword in education, and there's lots of buzzwords that go with it, as you see in this little graphic here. Some of the ones that we really focus on, communication is a big deal for us. We want our students to be able to communicate in an effective way, to explain scientific content in a way that anyone can understand it, and to share information, to have meaningful arguments. And so that's something we're really working on, and the iPad really supports that in a variety of ways. Going along with that, in the same kind of light, collaboration. This is a big term in the Common Core, especially, having students work together, sharing ideas, and building content on their own. And then, of course, literacy, which is another very, very big word. To me, this is much more than just reading literacy and writing literacy and math literacy. This is digital literacy. This is preparing kids to exist and communicate and be successful in the modern world. And so we're kind of thinking about all these things while we're designing the science lessons. We're trying to design them with all of this in mind, because to us it's more than just the science, it's creating a student who's prepared for the world that's coming their way. You've all seen this before, this is Bloom's taxonomy, right? Well, it's interesting, so you go from the basic levels, like remembering, understanding, all the way up to the more complex levels like creating. It's interesting, you see graphics like this all over the web now, using apps to address the Bloom's taxonomy levels. And we have used many of these in our classroom. We use the basic ones for remembering, so flashcards, things along that line. But then you build your way up. You saw students creating documentaries. That would be on the top tier of Bloom's taxonomy. So these devices really allow us to address all these needs. We have to prepare kids to have a desk like that, or even worse, a desk like that. Or the one that scares me is that. This is what they're working towards, though. We're trying to prepare them for that. In terms of 24/7 learning, the district has been wonderful in setting up systems that allow students to continue learning outside of the classroom. And that's what 24/7 learning is all about. Things like eChalk and Google Docs, which are now integrated and now can be used by the students. These are things that can really be utilized using the iPad. So now we're ensuring that every student has the device in their hand, can get to a Wi-Fi spot, whether it's at home or not at home, at Starbucks, whatever it is, and can access tools that are going to extend their classroom beyond the physical building itself. In the interest of time, I won't show you this. I've been using a tool the last couple of years called Edmodo, and there's a bunch of discussions. For example, my students tonight, my phone's been going off every 2 minutes because of this. My students tonight had a video to watch on galaxies, and they're learning the content at home, and then there's an open discussion board. And every time a student makes a post, my phone buzzes. And so there's this long discussion going, and it's just amazing to see what's happening outside the classroom. It's completely an extension of what we see going on inside the classroom. This is particularly interesting, and Mr. Francis and I were kind of embarrassed of what you're about to see. We're looking at materials usage, and we're looking at paper usage specifically in 8th grade science. We are very, very big offenders in terms of using too much paper, or at least we were. We sat down and looked at some of the numbers and how this change could impact us. Just to give you an idea of the numbers, before the iPads, this is 2 years ago, we estimated that the 4 8th grade science classes use in excess of 125,000 sheets of paper a year, which is kind of it's an embarrassing number because it's way too big, especially because we're teaching about the environment, and here we are using all this. It's exciting, though, to look at the last 2 years, and we've kind of analyzed this, and we've cut down our paper usage by more than half. And this is an estimate, of course, but we think we're down to 50,000, which is still an embarrassing number. But looking forward to the future, one of the many benefits of potentially going one-to-one is that we realistically think we can get down to less than 1,000 sheets of paper for all 4 science classes. You're talking about 2 reams of paper for an entire year of education for students, which is a pretty staggering thing, and that's one of the goals we're setting for ourselves. And it's both because we don't think we should be using this much paper, but beyond that, it teaches a great lesson to the kids. We're teaching them about our environment and the earth and how we can do our part to help save it. And starting by cutting down the amount of paper we use is a very good lesson for them to see. Want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So you might wonder where these nice round numbers came from, and we sat down and we actually even asked some of the other teachers. We were wondering if science teachers are the worst, or if it's the social studies teachers who are, putting up chapters from history books, or if it's the English teachers. We asked the English teachers. They said, it would be great if they could cut out their daily trips to the photocopy machine. They said, I make about 2,000 copies a week, or whatever. So we sat and we started looking at what our numbers were, and in order to save trees, start thinking about what we do. And one activity that we can look at, one case study, is actually a lesson we did that was 3 case studies. And what we want to show is a little bit about the dilemma we have, because we want to conserve paper, but at the same time, we want to present the information in the best way possible. So for example, we had 3 case studies. I'm only going to show you one of these things. We were looking at, erosion, and we looked at the old man of the mountain, you guys know, in New Hampshire, the face that fell off a few years ago, and we wanted to present them the information before we taught any of this material and let them try to figure it out. But in order to try to figure it out, they need to have the information. They need to be able to explore whichever direction they need to try to find the answer without guiding them too much. So we sat down and we prepared this on the iPads, and we explained where it was, and we gave them information that might be useful for them, and then we showed pictures of what it looked like. There were some kids that hadn't never seen it, others had driven by it dozens of times, and we gave more information about what people did to try to protect it. Some of the students didn't even realize that there were different points from different states, but I think they were exaggerating. So we've got like about 5 or 6 slides, and we could condense it to a couple of paragraphs on a paper, but I don't think it really conveys all that information. So we're looking at sheet after sheet after sheet. We got like 10 sheets. Each one of those packets would be for each case study. Then we'd have to have it for each group, and we'd have to have it for each teacher. And then on top of that, we'd have to have all the information, like what they have to explore, the human impact, the weather conditions, the climate conditions, the earthquake. Was it an earthquake that knocked it down? What was the reasoning behind it? And allowing them to explore that means the iPad allows us to be able to do both, not worry about paper, not be destroying trees or be depressed about it, about the environment, and actually be able to have the ability to show all this information to them. So we counted all this stuff up, and we're counting all this, and it's thousands of papers just for one activity. And we have, there's 5 days of the week, so we're talking about a lot of paper. So it gives us an opportunity to do both.
Yeah, that particular activity we've been doing for years, but we used to do it with paper. And it was thousands and thousands of sheets for one activity. It was a great activity, the kids loved it, but it was very wasteful. And so when we got the iPads, one of the first things we did was transfer over that. Everything you just saw there is what they would have seen on the iPad. And so they get the same experience, in fact, a much more rich experience, minus the paper uses. One of the neater ways is using an app like AirServer, which allows you to view the screens of multiple iPads on your one computer screen. So I can be sitting at my computer and I can actually see each student's individual screen. Even more impressively, I just did this, I think it was yesterday. This is in my classroom. This is my smartboard. I know it's a dark photo, but this is my smartboard. These are the iPads of 3 of my students, shown on the board live wirelessly. So I can take a student's work and wirelessly just beam it up to the board so everyone can see what they're doing. I could also, if I don't want to display it to the class, just show it on my personal computer so I can see what they're doing. The possibilities really are endless with this technology, and it's changing every day. It's a bit overwhelming, to be honest. In terms of personalized learning, I have some video clips here of some former students. We did a little bit of an exit interview with some of our students at the end of last year, after a year of using the iPads. And so I actually talked to some of my students, and I posed this question. I said, so how did the iPads change how you learned science this year? Let's see what they said.
I think it kind of stuck with me using iBooks and fewer more independently, because I was able to really think about each question as opposed to the teacher saying it and then moving on more quickly.
It's really helped me learn independently and use skills, like we do slides that help us learn by ourselves instead of just being lectured the whole class. It really helps us learn, and when we have questions we can ask, but most of the time we're just learning by ourselves, which helps.
I like using fewer and iBooks, because then when we do projects and stuff, I can work at my own pace and not wait for people or go faster.
Yeah, I don't know if you could hear Hannah there, but so you see the answer, and this was across the board. I could have shown 30 different kids who said the same thing, and this was unprovoked. They literally just said, it was awesome being in charge of my learning, which is such an amazing thing to hear a 13-year-old say. It's a very mature thing to say, which was very nice, and it made us feel kind of vindicated in all the work we had done, which is a very nice thing. To us, it's about differentiating the classroom. It's about allowing those students who are strong to cruise along, learn what they need to learn, and then to be enriched, to have the opportunity to do other activities. While at the same time, students who may have struggled or worked at a slightly slower pace can do that, and it's okay, and we can actually go and work one-on-one with the students who need it. It has completely changed our classroom. It's created a much more tailored and personal learning experience for the kids. Okay, this is a big thing. So I'm not an expert in this at all, but I keep hearing this from everyone that the PARCC assessments are coming, and they're coming soon. And they're coming in 2015. And so these are the Common Core, as I understand it, reading and math tests that are coming. And they're interesting for a lot of reasons, one of which is they're going to be entirely digital. So these are going to be computer-based tests, which we haven't done before. And so this got us thinking about technology and how are we going to do this exactly? And the iPad actually provides a great opportunity for dealing with this when it comes down the road. And eventually this will come to the Regents exams as well, where we're dealing with all online testing. I will show you another video clip that I thought was very interesting. So we asked those same kids at the end of the year last year, I asked them, how do you feel about taking tests? Because we did a period of time where we had students take their assessments on the iPad. This was last year. And we got some interesting answers.
I think it kind of stuck with me using iBooks and fewer more independently.
That's the wrong clip. I'm sorry about that. So here's what they said. They said, Todd, you have to trust me. They said, I hated taking tests on the iPad. They said, I love the iPad, I look forward to it every day, but the one thing I did not want to do was take tests on the iPad. Because students are very, very mature and again, very impressive. They said things like, I like to be able to cross out answers, and I like the feel of the paper in my hands, and I like to be able to circle things, which I totally understand. We actually teach them those techniques. But the reason it's an interesting thing is because it proves the point that with these PARCC assessments coming, one of the things we need to teach kids is how to take tests online. They need to learn how to, the strategies and the techniques for taking digital assessments, because clearly they don't like it and they're not comfortable with it. So it's yet another interesting implementation of the iPads. All right, and the last thing I want to talk about is the Common Core standards. I came across this list from another educator, which I think is really interesting and ties directly to the Common Core standards. Our goal right now, right, is to make our students college and then career ready. And so some of the things we have to look at to do that is can the kids demonstrate independence? Think about 24/7 learning. Can the kids build strong content knowledge? Look at all the stuff we're doing, this independent learning, this differentiation. Can they respond to the varying demands of the audience, task, purpose, and discipline? Again, something that can be addressed through a variety of activities on the iPad. Can they comprehend information and critique information? Think about communication. Think about students watching videos at home and then commenting on them. Can they value evidence? We do a lot of work where students go online using the iPads and collect research, and they have to evaluate whether that research is authentic, if it's accurate, or if it's not something they should rely on. This one goes without saying. Can they use technology and digital media strategically and capably? And then finally, can they come to understand other perspectives and cultures? Again, I think if you look at all the things we're doing and we have been doing, they address all of these things, and these can all be easily met using the iPad. A couple last quotes to end with. This was interesting. This is a friend of mine at the Apple Distinguished Educator community. He said this. He said, proficiency with technology allows students to succeed in college and in careers. The Common Core standards include basic technology skills to help them succeed. But in the bigger picture, they call for students to use technology to help them learn in all areas. Whether it be using tools to solve math problems, to access information, or to promote literacy and communication skills, technology is part of the learning solution. I don't know how else to say it other than we have seen this, and we see this every day firsthand. And that's it. That's what I thought.